This week on the Eldritch Lorecast. Did you see the cinematic go up for Enchanting Emporiums this morning?
I did!
Get your D&D survey review hats on.
The shot in the arm of anti-adrenaline to me, Ben. Civic duty.
Here comes the airplane!
Tal'dorei Reborn.
Well, actually, what interests me most about it being on maps is that book does not have any adventures in it.
Meanwhile, it took me so long to figure out Roll20 and maps. I understand Fantasy Grounds. The others, I'm lost.
Fantasy Grounds is the bane of my existence.
I'm incredibly cynical of AI.
I don't think AI as it exists right now, it is not actually artificial intelligence.
Candela Obscura, which I think is releasing to the public physically and through Candela Nexus. All that and more right now. Now, hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, episode 111. That's right, episode 111 of the number one podcast in all the realms. We will never be more number one than this unless we reach episode 1111, but that's going to take a very long time. My name's Ben Byrne, by the way, and I am joined by Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake. And James, I have to ask you, did you see the cinematic go up for Enchanting Emporiums this morning?
I did! It's so exciting. The Seeker's Guide to Enchanting Emporiums. We did a cinematic very much like this for Seeker's Guide to Twisted Taverns, which also had fantastic vocalist Anna Pantsu doing the song. Good. And I did not know her before I started working at Ghostfire. I watched that trailer and was like, she's incredible. And then I became a big fan of her. And so seeing her return to this for Enchanting Emporiums has just like made my heart all aflutter. Seeing cameos from some of the merchants that appear in there. Can we say that that's such and such's character Bramble? Yeah, Ginny D's shopkeeping gardener Pixie Bramble is there. My first D&D merchant Blackbird is there. Your contribution to the book, Ben, Professor Von Koofen is there. And that's barely even scratching the surface of all of the shops and NPCs that we've got going on in there. I'm just pumped beyond belief.
I am as well. I had nothing to do with the production of the cinematic. We had a really, really great team, including Danielle DeRosa, who did an amazing job on the animation with Ona Christensen's help. So the song is written by John Theodore, who also wrote the previous Twisted Tavern song and did the album for Twisted Taverns as well. And the initial version of the song I heard was him singing it just so you could hear what it sounds like. And then I heard, and before I saw any of the animation, I heard Anna Pantsu's version. And damn, does she inject the Seeker with so much character. My favorite line is when she goes, and I've got my own shop. And she injects that with so much character. And Nick and I looked at each other when he played that for me, and we were just like, all right, this is going to be good. This is going to work.
Ethereal Expanse trailer song with Colin McGinnis still kind of has the top place in my heart, but boy, does this rocket to a high second place.
I listened to it literally right now when you posted the link in chat, because I was not aware that it had gone up. So, I mean, look back to me while Joey is talking. And I'm just dancing because I'm listening to that song. It's great. It's really good.
Kudos. It's wonderful. It captures the feel of all of these things that we're doing with Ghostfire, right? It's serious, but it's also fun, but it's also catchy, and it does a great job of delivering, I think, on the themes and tone that we're going for. So absolutely.
You're absolutely right on that, Shawn, because we want the book to be big and flashy and fun, but also, have real depth underneath all of that glitz and glamour. You'll see some of the groundedness. Actually, if you look at that shopkeeper in the very beginning, before we go into look, and here's Bramble and stuff like that, that's actually someone from the Grim Hollow Emporium that will be showing up later. Little cameo there. And you really can't get more gritty and grounded than the dark fantasy thing we're pulling out there. Despite what Ben's contrarian video said the other week about dark fantasy magic item shops not making very much sense, I defy him with this shop that I've written.
Okay, all right.
You should make a video in which you say that Ben Byrne is an honorable man like 20 times.
We were talking about this just before we went live. James, you clearly didn't watch the whole video because the thesis point, you hook him by saying this thing is wrong, and then you say, but actually it is right. It's XP to level 3. Jacob Buds used to do videos called like X thing is dumb. And then like usually by the end of the video, he kind of turns around. And that's honestly how I've approached a couple of videos that we've done, not to just do a deep dive into the Ghostfire YouTube video now, but I don't know if this is the same for the both of you, but been like, this thing doesn't work. I would never have this in my campaign. But maybe if, and then that kind of leads you down the rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah. That's half my videos, yeah.
Before I started at Ghostfire, I saw the book Twisted Taverns, and I saw how well it did on Kickstarter and watched the cinematic for that. And I was like, people really buy this, huh? It's not something, huh? And then I actually got the book and opened it and went, wow, this is really, really good. This is something that anyone, I think, would use, even crusty old gamers like me, would use this in a heartbeat in my games. So I'm a convert.
It's an amazing song, but I am looking forward to the book. We'll talk about it a bit more next week when the Kickstarter launches on the 21st. But you can, of course, go to the Kickstarter page. I don't have a link up. Dante, save us. If you want to go check it out. But for now, get your D&D survey review hats on, ladies and gentlemen, because it's time for another survey review.
The shot in the arm of anti-adrenaline to me, Ben.
just gone from a like super high energy song to a let's sit down and
take your medicine.
Time to do my civic
Here
duty.
comes the airplane.
Look, they dropped a D&D or Wizards of the Coast dropped a video with Jeremy Crawford, Chris Perkins, and I'm blanking, Todd Kenrick, interviewing the both of them about the playtest packet number 7 and the survey results. They talked a little bit more about what's going to be in those core books next year. And I don't think anything new was revealed. I think we largely actually covered it last week when we talked about their GameholeCon reveals. So
the pugilist is out.
Yes. So that's what I wanted to talk about was the last like 10 minutes of that half-hour video, which is that they looked at the survey results. The Brawler for the fighter is being dropped from the 2024 Player's Handbook due to low satisfaction scores, and also kind of conceptual crossover with the monk, which is what I thought from the start.
It's fair. It's very fair, and lots of comments about it have been along those lines. I do think for me, this really shows, I think, the time limitations on the work they're doing for this half edition, because I think that ordinarily, if you have a cool idea that's cool enough that you put it out there in front of the public and get feedback on it, I think that the instinct from most game designers when they get feedback on it that's negative would be, how do I fix this and make it better, rather than let's just take it out. But I think that we're seeing a lot of stuff at the moment that they've put forward that people have not reacted well to, so they're just dropping it. And I think that that's probably a symptom of there's not enough time to figure out how to make this work before we have to release it. And so they're making the right choice. If you can't get it right, then get rid of it. But it is a shame that there's not kind of a longer sort of leash for them to go ham and just invent cool new stuff. Because I would love to see an official brawler that works, that's really cool, that is fighter specific rather than, clashing with the monk. I would love to see that. And I'm sure that they would come up with something great, but we're not going to see it in time.
Well, I just don't see a brawler that does that's fighter specific, right? Somebody, Boy Dolphin, just said in the chat that the brawler should be a monk subclass, and I agree with that. Like, you can't get more punchy than someone who gets punches as a bonus action.
I disagree because key is core to the monk. Go ahead.
Yes, but maybe I want to play a brawler that doesn't have key points. Maybe I want to play a brawler that hasn't gone to a monastery for 20 years and has these tenets. Maybe, and so you look at it through game mechanics. Yes, it doesn't make any sense to have a fighter that does this thing that this other class does better. Story-wise, though, as Dael said, there should be a way to do this so it's two different things, but it takes time and it takes iteration, and it takes understanding on the part of the players why you might want to do that, because it's not only about mechanics, it's also about story. So in that sense, it should be there.
Shawn's on my side. Nah.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but I think that the monk can fulfill that same story, particularly because they're moving away from the sort of Orientalism of the monk. They're not calling it key points in the next edition.
Sure,
they're calling it
still
like focus points. And the fact that a monk trains in a monastery is purely story. There's nothing mechanical about that necessarily. And they could introduce a subclass, as said, that maybe doesn't paralyze, but maybe does, I don't know, extra damage or can heal itself. Because to me, the brawler, the kind of pub fighter, the thing that a brawler would be using their key points or their focus points on, which I think they said they were changing it to focus or something along that lines, is the Captain America stand back up, I can do this all day, kind of like, you know, you're bloodied, you're bruised, you're kind of swaying on your legs a little bit, but you're ready to go again. That to me is a brawler that can be told through the core mechanics of the monk with maybe some subclass adjustments to make it feel a little less, I don't know, a mystical, I think is what the monk has that the
so
fighter
what we're getting into there
have.
is very specifically the flavor that is added by the names of different features, right? You're saying
Sure.
that changing it from key to focus completely changes that flavor. And I agree, but you're still calling it a monk. And what you just described to me sounds like a fighter, not a monk. And so even though mechanically it is functioning under the monk class, just by virtue of being called a monk, it changes the flavor of it completely and makes it something that doesn't sit quite right with me. And that doesn't automatically mean, okay, well then you have to have a separate subclass that achieves the same thing under the, that's not what I mean, but I think there's a lot of layers to it. And I agree with what Shawn said. I think that you would have to mechanically set it apart to make it really sensible to do, but I think that it would be a worthwhile endeavor if you had the time to put into it to come up with a thing. Because it's like you can have a fighter who is a 2-weapon wielding, you know, a sort of slashy type, and you can have a ranger who is a 2-weapon wielding slashy type, and those are still things that feel very different, even if you're kind of starting from a very similar standpoint.
My question for people who want to play a brawler fighter is, what would a subclass give you that playing a champion or a battle master with the tavern brawler feat not give you? As tavern brawler, it is a feat cost, right? So there is something, but fighters get more feats than any other class, right? They get them just as early, just as often, more often, and you either wind up with your big champion athleticism and improved crit range, or you have that battle master tripping and moving and pushing and yelling, all of which sound very Street Fighter to me.
Do you add a fighting style like we already have for fighters that covers some of the things that you would want in a brawler?
Well, Tosh has introduced an unarmed fighting style for the fighter.
Okay.
So I
thought maybe there was.
I think it's all tied up, if you ask me. But what we're getting at here is kind of a question of game design philosophy, right? Because I think the reason why we're having this conversation is, to me, core identity issues like this are the domain of subclasses. If you want, because I think Brawler is a really close identity to an entire character, not just the way they fight. And so that's something we're used to seeing out of a subclass, not something you have to kind of pull in from other sources, from a feat and a fighting style and cobble together in this way. That may have been, it feels kind of third edition to me.
This is, okay, so I had to go and double check what the exact benefits of Tavern Brawler are. And this is one of those things that I understand, broadly speaking, is not a problem. It's very much just a problem with me. This is one of those feats that to me, it's like, yeah, this is giving me good stuff that I should have access to anyway, if that's what I want to be doing. You know what I mean? So there are feats that like lose the penalties to wielding 2 weapons. You know what I mean? You take this feat or you take this fighting style, and now you are just normal amounts of good if you're fighting with 2 weapons. And this one is similar in that regard, where it's like you are proficient with improvised weapons. Your unarmed strike uses a D4 for damage. These are all things that, like, from a game design perspective, yes, these are definite improvements. It's a great thing to take. That's awesome. But from the perspective of like a player who just wants to be a dude who punches real good, this is like bare minimum.
Bare minimum. Yeah.
Bare minimum.
I agree with you.
And that's all you get.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I was under the impression that, like, if you pick up an improvised weapon and you're proficient with something that would be similar to that weapon, such as, like, you pick up a chair leg and the GM says, okay, that's equivalent to a club, you count as being proficient with that weapon. Am I correct? So that, like, you're proficient with improvised weapons, it's like, yeah. Like, anybody who's proficient with simple weapons is basically going to be proficient with improvised weapons, right? Because everything is basically a club, you know, unless it's something more, unless it's, I don't know, sharp, in which case it's a dagger, which is also a simple weapon. And that's exactly it. That's what the fighter can't provide currently that maybe a brawler subclass could provide. And I can't remember, honestly, what the benefits of the brawler subclass were in that Unearthed Arcana. But it's raw damage, you know, like the monk gets those ongoing bonuses to their unarmed strikes that keep going up as they level up, so that it continues to be, they can keep up with the damage output of their fellow party members with those unarmed strikes.
It is always wild when you think about it in that way, where it's like, I mean, it makes sense, but it's still wild to think that the monk is getting more punches and those punches are dealing like a D10 of damage, and then you've got a barbarian who's like yoked, who punches once and it's a D4 max.
It's not even a D4. It's
not a D4 unless they took Tavern Brawler. Like,
It's not about how hard you hit, it's where you hit, I suppose.
The unarmed fighting style, by the way, which fighters get as of Tasha's, is your unarmed strikes deal 1d6 plus strength bludgeoning, and if you don't have any weapons or shield in your offhand, it becomes a d8. It's a pretty good fighting style for describing what we're going for here.
Sure.
It also lets you deal damage while grappling.
Okay, so here's a question that might be controversial and kind of like harkening back to an earlier discussion we've had about the fighter. But then what is a brawler if not like Battle Master plus that fighting style? You know, does that basically get you a brawler?
Yeah. I think the Tavern Brawler feat gives you something useful to grappling on top of that, but it's a pretty small little thing. Maybe thrown weapons also. I don't remember offhand.
The grappling thing is often why I find players take it, is because they're like, oh, well, if I can knock something prone and then grapple it, then it's advantage on all attacks and it can't go anywhere or do anything, and it wastes every one of its turns trying to escape that grapple, which as a GM is the most infuriating strategy for your party to frequently employ. So everything suddenly gets Misty Step. But I also find that, you know, if that strategy doesn't go off, it doesn't succeed, it's very disappointing for the player, who then just feels like their turn's wasted because they're not even doing any damage or anything useful during that turn.
All the grapple stuff needs a rework. I'm
going through that right now with my home group. I may have mentioned this before. If I did, forgive me. The whole thing is there's a monk who grapples and then moves creatures through a zone that is created by the wizard to do damage. And at first I was like, oh boy, okay. And then when I started throwing things out there to disrupt that, they couldn't kill anything. So I was like, all right, this is going to be their shtick. We're just going to roll with it, and I'm going to let it happen. And it's maybe not how I envision D&D being played, but with these chuckleheads, that's what they like. So that's what we do.
I also think it's worth mentioning that a lot of, you know, subclasses or classes clash with one another in a certain way. Like you were saying, once you're a fighter with the unarmed fighting style, what's the point of having a brawler subclass? Have you already achieved that fantasy? But like you could say the same for a rogue thief, right? Once you're a rogue who has, expertise in sleight of hand and stealth, is there really a reason to then take the thief subclass? Because you're already going to be pickpocketing and sneaking around to your heart's content. You know what I mean? Like, it's the point that once you get to the subclass range, you're doing more and bigger and better than that base concept. You're really packing as much into that fantasy as you can. And I guess at the heart of it, I'm not saying that I would or wouldn't have a brawler. I'm just saying that I think if they were given the time that they needed, they would come up with things to make that bigger and better and more packed full of flavor.
I think that's fair. Like going back to that point, because there were two kind of things that sparked in my brain when you were first commenting on this, which is, what is the value of a brawler? How do you achieve a brawler in 5e, branching off from their current rules? Because in that video, they wanted to let you know, and in no uncertain terms, everything is backwards compatible. Everything. Every adventure, you can play them all. They're all backwards compatible. They said it like 7 times, I want to say, in that first 20 minutes of that video. But the other thing is, I think you're right. I think a lot of what they've thrown out, if it doesn't get a positive score straight away, just gets scrapped. I feel like there are other examples of that I can't think of off the top of my head. So somebody save me or prove me a liar. But I feel like that has been the general kind of tenor through a lot of these playtests.
The psionics is the big one that they just tossed out. It's been a while that they haven't done it recently, but
Brawler gone. There will be one more playtest packet before the end of this year. Hopefully it's before we go on break, so I can mentally torture you all by reviewing another 50-page document. But hey, maybe you're hoping it'll be as close to Christmas as possible. We shall see. High satisfaction scores with most everything else. I think they said some of the barbarian features got lower satisfaction scores, but they weren't specific on what they were. But the most everything else is being kept. Speaking of Wizards of the Coast, D&D Maps received an update. This is actually the second update that it's received since it first launched. This new one adding Icewind Dale, Candlekeep Mysteries, so you can purchase those through Maps and then have the maps for those added. And they've also added, interestingly, Tal'dorei Reborn.
Boo, boo, boo.
James, you said you were pretty excited about this on social media?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, absolutely. Tal'dorei Reborn is a great book. Well, actually, what interests me most about it being on Maps is that book does not have any adventures in it. As far as I can recall, it has no 5-foot square, 1-inch tactical maps in it at all. It has city scale maps. It has overland maps. And all of the advertising that D&D Beyond is using for it really focuses in on those overland maps, which is an element of the virtual tabletop that I don't think you see people, brag about very often. It's like, yeah, you can do all sorts of things on this, not just the tactical grid. But really, I'm just excited to see that Tal'dorei Reborn is not just, okay, it's on the DM's Guild, now we're done with it. It's, even though it does not have that sort of core functionality of tactical maps, it's still being used as a core component of this new feature that they're rolling out. So I'm just fascinated with what their philosophy is with that book, with third-party books in general, and hoping that it extends to things like, Grimhollow or Kobold Press or any of the other really, really good third-party stuff that's out there.
Are there stat blocks in Tal'dorei Reborn?
Yeah.
So I think that would, like, the monster art would be converted into tokens, and those stat blocks, I think, would move across so that you could drop those monsters into any game that you're playing using maps.
That makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot of stat blocks in that book.
Already added on there previously is Glory of the Giants, Planescape, Phandelver and Below, Curse of Strahd. Probably Curse of Strahd, I feel like, is going to go down as probably the better of the last 10 years of adventures, right? If not the best.
That was some good qualifying that you did in there. Yes, I would agree with that.
Did I leave Keys from the Golden Vault, Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and Dragon of Stormwreck Isle also on there. Carlos sent an email to podcast@ghostfiregaming.com, and this email is pertinent to this topic, which is Maps just, as good, if not better, than the 3D VTT that Wizards have shown off previously? Maps requires less development and support cost on Wizards' behalf. Requires a lot less of the user in terms of their computer specs, I would imagine, and is likely ticking a lot of the boxes that folks need from a VTT to seem as good as, at least, something like Roll20 Fantasy Grounds or Owlbear Rodeo, as somebody commented in the chat.
I think that it leaves out a big sector of what I suspect Wizards of the Coast are aiming for with their 3D virtual tabletop, which is streamers. I think that it is more visually pleasing, and hopefully once it's all set up, will run more smoothly because it'll have certain aspects that are familiar from the UI of things like video games, so that when you are running a game on stream for your audience for the sake of entertainment, I think that's what they're aiming for. It'll be more flashy and encourage more people to go, "Ooh, that looks cool. I want to try it." I don't think that it's necessarily going to have more utility. I think it will have different utility. I think there are tons of tables who are still going to prefer using maps, who are probably actually going to still prefer to use Fantasy Grounds, D20, or Roll20, like whatever program they're already using is probably going to stay their favorite program.
Yeah, sure.
I just think that they're aiming for something else.
Yeah, it's a matter of what people will find most useful for their level of engagement with the software. It took me a full weekend to figure out the basics of Roll20. It took me 30 seconds to figure out how to use maps. So if
meanwhile, it took me so long to figure out Roll20 and maps. I understand Fantasy Grounds. The others, I'm lost.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating because Fantasy Grounds is the bane of my existence.
Yeah, I gave up on Fantasy Grounds after quite a while of trying to use it. Roll20 with a lot of tutorials and a full weekend and a little bit of whiskey, I was able to get that down. But maps is what I've said this before. Maps is what I wanted, which is I want to throw a map up and I want to be able to drag things onto it, let my players move things around, let me move things around. I don't need any of the other automation. That's what I want. And hopefully that will be out there for people that want to use it as a lower cost option to what we assume will be a larger stream-worthy, integrated, but high prep time version that we'll probably be getting later.
I do have this gut feeling that what Wizards is doing with the Unreal Engine powered virtual tabletop is, one, exactly as you said, to appeal to a more visual audience involved medium. But I'm also curious to see if they have plans beyond that, right? Wizards has things in mind for D&D that go beyond just the role-playing game. They've made that very clear to us in things like shareholder meetings and the Content Creator Summit and stuff like that. They're being all very private with the specifics of how they want to expand the brand are, but I really wonder if they are aiming to create something here that is more of a merging of tabletop and video games, and we're really cognizant of here. What can they automate within the system that would take this, to a step beyond necessarily meaning better, but beyond meaning beyond. And my hope there, and I feel pretty, I don't feel worried about this because of the way that the art team of Wizards has steered away from using AI. But my hope is that they don't, lean into any sort of AI-driven DMing or anything like that. Because I know that if they can find a way to single-playerize D&D, that opens up so many enormous avenues for them, right? Isn't the main obstacle to getting people to play D&D scheduling? Doesn't everyone say this? How can you find a way to make more people play D&D single player? How can you make D&D playing that like Baldur's Gate, right?
This is the dystopian view on it, but I mean, it makes sense as well, because the other thing is that we know that DMs are the ones who buy the books. So if every player was, playing with an AI DM, then they would be buying the books to run those different things. So you would spread out but it is the dystopian view. This is very pessimistic.
Well, I mean, I hope if they keep AI quests and stuff like that out of the game, my view suddenly turns to very optimistic. I think having some kind of single player, or at least, more highly ease of accessified option for D&D is potentially really interesting.
I love the word ease of accessified.
Add them to the dictionary all the time.
It's that one word.
And there's no hyphens there. It's just all one word.
Well, you do it the German way here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I'm incredibly cynical of AI, as a lot of people are, but I'm genuinely cynical of its functionality. And I don't know that we would get to a point, because, like, look, Baldur's Gate, when I sat down to play Baldur's Gate, I might have even said this on the Lorecast before, when I sat down to play Baldur's Gate, I am genuinely impressed at how many options they gave you in terms of the way that the game does emergent gameplay, you know, and something you wouldn't think that they would think of, they thought of, and you can do a cool thing because of it. And it feels like you came up with this unique, cool way of doing things. And the first demonstration they gave was like, you can throw your shoes at a monster. It was like a really early demonstration they gave in early access, which you can't do in, you know, other games. Cool. All right. It's in my inventory. It's an item. I can throw it at a monster, but I can't throw that rock there at a monster, can I? Like, you immediately start to see the limitations of Baldur's Gate 3 if you have any sort of video game literacy that allows you to see the borders that you're constantly bumping up against with Baldur's Gate 3. Not to say it's not impressive, but it's not limitless in the way that
you're
D&D
exactly
is.
right. And it's a bizarre thing finding your grounding there, because I went in with you having said that, and I was like, okay, so Ben pointed out that you can't just think like it's a video game because you'll miss all these other opportunities. So I was trying to think of it like a role-playing game, and then I kept running up against glitches or things like that would reinforce, oh, no, but it is a video game still. You know what I mean? It was like, I want to put out this fire, let me throw this bottle of water, but there was this big glitch that just every time you went to throw a bottle of water, it wouldn't throw the water and it would use your action for the turn. So it was really bad. And it was just like, oh, okay, but it is still a program. So I exactly get what you mean, that idea of like, there is so much opportunity with AI when it comes to things like tabletop RPGs, but also,
I think that AI specifically will be more flexible because AI is generative in the moment.
I agree, but I don't think AI as it exists right now, like we call it AI because it's not something different to what we have, but it is not actually artificial intelligence. And maybe once we reach a higher stage, maybe, but what we currently have, I just don't think that it'll actually achieve a level of understanding necessary to match the flexibility. I don't think it understands context the way that a human DM.
I just want a DM that sounds like Hal from 2001. I'm sorry, Dael. You can't do that. That would be highly irregular.
I also think that right now, Wizards of the Coast probably is still feeling the eyes that are upon them, both post OGL and post Glory of the Giants AI art sort of scandal. I think that they're probably going to hold off any experimenting with that for a while.
Yeah, I just don't think it will replace the experience. Like, I think that lots of people have had fun, you know, creating their own text adventures within an AI that they've just done on their own. And that's, you know, cool and impressive in its own right. And there's going to be people that I think will really enjoy that, turning D&D into a single player or a non-DM experience. But I don't think you'll ever get to the point of completely replacing the DM, because what's special about D&D isn't the adventure. What's special about D&D is the exchange of ideas and the exchange of themes and emotion and the experience that you're having together. But yeah, no, the 2D VTT is very impressive. I think it's cool. I'd use it. I'd probably use Owlbear Rodeo. I just never had a use case to use a VTT, but if I ever
Poor
do...
Owlbear Rodeo got a 2.0 update recently, and it's good, but it's not simple anymore. And that was the biggest thing I liked about it.
Ooh, yeah. Okay.
All of its features are pretty nice, but I tried to open it for a game, and this was a couple of months ago, and I was like, hey, just so you know, in a couple of weeks, we're migrating everything over to the version 2.0. And I'm like, oh no. And I tried out the version 2.0, and, you know, it was 10 minutes before a game. And I'm like, I have no idea how to learn all of these things. I don't know how to do the basic stuff anymore because they're all clustered in with all of these new features that oh my God. And I canceled I didn't cancel the session, but I changed all of my plans for the fight. And I was like, I'm not using this. There's going to be no fight today.
Yeah. That is, I mean, what I would have said was if I do pick up a VTT again, it'll probably be the maps on D&D Beyond for the pure reason that it integrates with D&D Beyond seamlessly.
It's also nice having the maps there, not having to source maps separately and then bring them in. That's a nice
that's true.
element.
But it allows you to bring maps in, which I think is also a nice element so that you're not stuck with just what they're providing. But they do have things there that you don't have to upload every map yourself on the flip side. I'm not sure what the functionality of Owlbear Rodeo was, but yeah, now I would definitely go to the D&D Beyond maps, just assuming that it's simpler and easy. Like I just want a virtual tabletop. That's all I want. A tabletop that's virtual, not a video
And
game.
if they can integrate your character stats into it from D&D Beyond in a way that's unobtrusive, that's awesome. Well, I mean, that's the thing. When they were making 5th edition in 2012 to 2014, one of the things they really hammered on, the game devs really hammered on over and over, was we want this game to be as unobtrusive as possible. We want this game to get out of the way and let you get to role-playing. And, Dungeons and Dragons being Dungeons and Dragons, that can never really be true. But if we're grading on the curve of how unobtrusive D&D can be, they sure succeeded. And I think that's just a great guiding star for everything D&D can do. Get the system out of the way as possible, streamline it as much as possible so that you can focus on the thing you want to do, which is playing the game. And if either maps or the 3D VTT can manage to do those things, they've got a winner. It just depends on what audience you are.
Speaking of technology, Candela Obscura, which I think is releasing to the public tomorrow US time, but it's in. I don't know if it's in a. I don't know if I can go down to a bookshop or a game shop and buy it right now in Australia, but it is the 14th today. But it is releasing tomorrow physically and through Candela Nexus or Candela Obscura Nexus, I should say, through Demiplane, which is cool. If you want your digital tools, anybody going to look at this? I suppose not, because it's not out yet. Okay, cool. So this is just an ad read then. Candela Obscura Nexus launching on November 14. Includes the core rules to play and create your investigator and your circle. Overview of the Fairlands and the new fair. I don't know what those words mean, but overview of the lore of Candela Obscura. Digital dice mechanics, so you don't need those loud, noisy, heavy clickety-clacks. And other GM tools and handouts like art, maps, research notes. Becoming Nexus. Oh, no, that's my own note. November 14th. Grab it while it's hot. Also, is Nexus becoming, this was my question, the non-D&D kind of user interface of choice? I don't want to call it a VTT because it's not really a VTT, but like the digital tool set of choice. Is that how they're positioning themselves?
They sure would love to be. I mean, Adam Bradford, who made D&D Beyond, is making Nexus. So I knowing his ambition, I think they want it to be.
And you can get 5e stuff there. So it is the D&D. It's the 5e on D&D, but also D&D Beyond.
Yes.
That made perfect sense to me.
Too.
That's what they call it.
Always make perfect sense to me.
Yes, Nexus, the D&D, non-D&D, but is D&D, but not officially the place for D&D, but you can get your D&D there.
D&D Beyond.
All they need is a song sung by Sam Riegel, and they'll have it. If they can do something as catchy as his little D&D Beyond D&D sort of thing, it's in the bag.
Everybody knows the trick to marketing is just songs. We know it, they know it.
My dear friend, behold, enchanting emporiums have it all.
Just write a song. It's easy. It's easy. Just do a song.
Simply just.
You haven't got a song yet? Oh, what all the cool kids are doing. Songs these days. Cool. So go check it out. If you like your digital tools, Candela Obscura will be available through Demiplane. Ephos asking, Sourcebook versus Adventure. Now, I know, Shawn, you're going to contend this somewhat, having spoken to Mike Shea, but let me set up the proposition of the email first, and then we will get the rebuttal. Mike Shea apparently saying on their podcast, the Lazy DM podcast, preferring Sourcebooks over adventure modules in terms of products released, generally by Wizards of the Coast, but by, I think, third-party publishers as well. Sourcebooks offering new player options, new GM options, optional rules, and things that both the player and the GM can kind of sink their teeth into. But published adventures they're rarely worthwhile since they only really offer 1 or 2 run-throughs of the adventure, and then you're kind of done with them. At best, you can scavenge adventure parts out of them for your own campaign from a module, but, who wants to run a module straight out of the book? Apparently. So, are published adventures worth the cost? Do they have reusability? What are some good nuggets of unintended material that we've found in the pages of adventure modules? But then more than that, is the proposition of the question even accurate? Are source books better value for money, I suppose, than adventure modules? Shawn Merwin for the rebuttal.
So I went, seeing the question, I went to Mike and I said, Mike, did you say this? And he gave us a sort of. So what he said, what he meant, whatever he said, what he meant was published adventures can be okay, but not as a substitute for campaign source books. So it's fine if you have a campaign source book and then have an adventure that follows up, but Mike prefers campaign source books of a setting to just an adventure within a setting. Because for all the reasons then that Ephoros talked about. And that sort of makes sense to me. Not always, but sort of. Like I loved Curse of Strahd, and I could run many Ravenloft adventures just based on that adventure. I could pull pieces out of it. I could elaborate upon certain things. I could take the themes, I could take the concepts and just port them over into a different domain and still be okay. Was Van Richten's guide great? I think it was. But it's sort of one or the other. And I think that DMs need adventures just as much as they need campaign settings. Because each setting has sort of its own tone and its own flow. And so you could get a setting book that's really well done, world building, wonderful, but not really understand how to run an adventure or how to build an adventure within that setting. So I think I don't want a setting without both. If I'm building something or if I'm buying something, I want to know the world building bits and I want to know the adventure bits. How does the creator of this world or the creators of this world see an adventure flowing through this setting?
I'm of a similar opinion, Shawn, mostly because an adventure is a game, right? A game is not just a mechanical subset. Like let's look at an example outside of D&D. Let's look at Super Mario, right? If you had the physics system to Mario, every single verb in Mario in a white room, I would not call that a game without the levels. And so just like that, if you have, or like a wiki with everything about the Mushroom Kingdom in it, right?
Can I just quickly inject? Sorry, It's just interesting that you pick Super Mario specifically because we literally have the example here. What you're comparing is a Super Mario game or Super Mario Maker, which is a game that they made to use the mechanics to make Mario levels.
Yes. Well, that's a very curious thing because in my ideal world, the Dungeon Master's Guide would be the Super Mario Maker of D&D. And I think the reason why people are often so hard on DMGs is because they don't give them that. The DMG is far too diffuse and not specific enough and not usable enough to be Super Mario Maker. One of the reasons why Super Mario Maker is so great is because it's so intuitive in its ability to let you build the actual game while still giving you that physics system kind of underneath the hood. And so I guess it's the end of that thought. That's the end of that thought in particular. I'm trying to think if I have anything to follow that up on. Other than when you're talking about a campaign setting, I have to wonder if these days a hardbound book is even the proper form factor for it. I would so much rather have a wiki than a hardcover book about the Forgotten Realms. And while the Forgotten Realms wiki on fandom has its issues, namely that these days a lot of it isn't really canon anymore. It's not officially made, so there's kind of some fan speculation that muddies the water. And it's
well,
no, you're right, Dael. Like being able to see an encyclopedic page, have a bunch of hyperlinks, and like go through it that way, rather than the often sort of labyrinthine and unintuitive layout that a hardbound book has to give information in, is just so much more convenient. I almost hope, this is maybe too bold of me to say, I almost hope we just don't get hardbound campaign settings anymore. I would so much rather have a website.
You heard it here first. James hates print media.
Burn it all down.
Yep.
Wait, aren't you the editor on a magazine?
It's tricky for me because I understand that I am one specific type of DM and that there are so many other DMs. There are DMs out there who get a book and they run the adventure from the book. And that is just unfathomable to me. I have become fascinated with the idea that anyone is capable of doing that, because I'm the person who, I love adventures. Like I love Curse of the Crimson Throne from Pathfinder. I love Hollow's Last Hope, which was an adventure that they did. From D&D, I love, Dragon Heist or Descent into Avernus, but I love them for the ideas they give me, not for what they actually are. Cool. I never run the adventure as written. At most, I look at the adventure and I rewrite it from top to bottom. But usually I go, the idea of sieging hell is great. I'm going to scrap everything else except for what the title gives me. And so my like ideal version of an adventure or a setting guide is kind of a mash of the two, right? Where it's like, here's the concept of the place. Let's tell you about it. Let's give you player options. Let's give you all this stuff. Here's a bunch of NPCs and plot hooks that could tie into the world, into this city that you're playing in. And then we'll give you an example adventure at the back of the book that's, just this one little thing that uses some of those ideas, but not all of them. But here's one idea we had with all the pieces we put together. And I love those things because it gives me just kind of like a buffet menu of stuff I can pick from. Because I am not the target audience for either adventure books or campaign setting books, because I think too much. And so I tend to do a lot of that stuff myself. So if you give me one thing that really focuses on doing that thing really well, it's actually going to be less useful to me than something that kind of gives you lots of bits and pieces. But there are DMs for whom, they're coming up with an adventure is second nature. So giving them just a campaign guide is great. There are DMs for whom they can come up with all these ideas themselves and they don't need any of it. There are DMs for whom they're going to run directly from the adventure book and not care about the campaign setting. There's any number of these things, and it all just goes back to like how kind of the OGL was created in the first place, like this idea that the company at the heart of it is making most of its money through the stuff that the DMs are going to buy, and then it's like the player's guide, the core books, that's what I'm talking about. And then it becomes something that other third-party groups can crop up around for adventures and things like that, because there is a smaller audience for those. So it's not as worthwhile for the core company, but it's very worthwhile for third-party companies who are going to make their living off these smaller but still robust audiences. If that makes any sense. I don't know whether I explained myself very well.
Sure. No, I think so. I mean, I do want to answer this question, but I have a point I want to make first. But Arpeggio was asking in the chat, what's the most important thing we think an adventure needs to make it useful for DMs? And I suspect we'd all have different answers. And that's why it's hard to create these books because people have different preferences because they all run the game differently. I think that I prefer adventure modules to source books. And this is only because whenever I've gotten a source book like Ravenloft, I read barely any of it. What I'm interested in are the mechanics that it gives me that help me capture a gothic vibe. But I'm not reading the lore of Ravenloft because, I'm running it in Grim Hollow or my own campaign setting. Whether as adventure modules, I might run it relatively strictly to the adventure. I ran Tomb of Annihilation 3 times almost for different groups, but changed the lore and the characters so thoroughly into my own setting that I can't remember what's from the book and what I invented myself. But I think an example of a really good melding of the two, and this is going to be the meme of the guy from The Office, Steve Carell, getting an award from his own boss because it's a Ghostfire adventure, but I had nothing to do with it, which is Dungeons of Drakkenheim, which I think is an excellent book for providing both an adventure and yet a lot of lore that helps you capture the vibe of that setting really strongly, because probably largely because there are factions in that book which are fighting over the city, and you can side with one faction, but it'll automatically make you enemies of another faction, and you can play factions off against each other. But there's so much implicit storytelling about the world through those factions that the players will pick up as they explore it. But also because there's a great new mechanic in that, being the delirium, which causes contamination, which is something unique to that setting, or it feels unique to that setting, that introduces new things that you can then port into further adventures you might have either in Drakkenheim or in another setting entirely. I just think that book in particular does a really good job of straddling the line between adventure setting and Sourcebook and adventure. And it's the one I always recommend to people when they're like, look, I don't like coming up with adventures, but I need a world in which to set my campaign. Should I grab a Sourcebook or an adventure module? I'm like, get Dungeons and Drakkenheim, because it kind of does both.
So why did Spelljammer disappoint people?
Because it didn't have ship fighting. That's why.
Introduce you to Pirates of the Ethereal Expanse.
Because it has to fulfill it genuinely does. It has to fulfill the fantasy that people have built up in their head from the concept, right? And if it misses one of the major aspects of that, like spaceship combat, it's a wash. There's nothing you can do at that point.
I'd also be curious to know, like, because I haven't flicked through them, any of the Dragonlance, the Spelljammer, or the Planescape for that matter books, to know what's in those source books specifically. I think with Drakkenheim, the Delirium rules tie into the campaign so directly, you can't not include them in a campaign that you're running in Drakkenheim. They are part of they're included in the book because they're part of that campaign, you know? Whereas are there parts, and this is a genuine question, of the Spelljammer book that are just kind of like, yeah, if you want to run an adventure in Spelljammer, you could use this or you could use that, but they don't really tie into the campaign in that fundamental way.
Legitimately, I think it's the opposite, right? Like just like you mentioned, the fundamental mechanic of ships is barely present, and that is just a crisis for the setting.
I'm going through Planescape right now on a different podcast. We've just gotten through today the second of the 3 books. So we covered the Sigil and the Outlands. We just covered the monster book. We're about to go into the setting. And Teos and I have just repeatedly come back to exactly what we're talking about here, which is we've got this setting guide and it does certain things. But the one thing that it hasn't done to our satisfaction yet is tell us how to run an adventure in this setting. What would an adventure look like in this setting? Now, in this case, they put it in there. It's just in a separate book we haven't gotten to yet. Right. But when Joe Rosso and I at Gamehole Con did our panel, we talked about one game, many worlds, one world, many games, and how world building will be different based on what you're going to do with that world. Are you going to run role-playing games in it? Are you going to write fiction in it? Are you going to make a video game, card game, etc.? Because you're going to build it differently and express in different ways the elements of this world based on what medium you're going to be using. And so this, for me, is a lot of this question is, what are you going to do with this? If you're making a role-playing game, yes, I'm cheating on another podcast. Shawn making a world to write fiction in is going to be different than a world to make a game in, because with a game, you're making a tool set, not fiction. You're making a tool set for other people to build stories with your stuff. So you want it to be different. You want to show differently how things are going to flow in these 2 different worlds, even though it's the same world.
I will ask, what are some things that we think are most important to an adventure to make it useful for DMs, which Alpeggio asked in the chat just before?
For me, it's an adventure summary. I love being able to read through the adventure before I read through the adventure, just to figure out like what are the broad strokes, what's most important, and then my brain can run from there.
Yeah, a clarity of motion. How do you get from point A to point B, point B to point C? It doesn't have to be in a flow chart. Flow charts can help, but it just has to make sense.
Chat loves flowcharts.
I don't, but I understand why they need them for certain adventures. But it has to make sense that the players would do the things, or at least find a way to make themselves do the things that lead them through the adventure in a way that you don't want. I'll use this example forever. The adventure assumes that as you're sitting in this bar looking out the window and guards are capturing a suspect, you're not going to rush out and help the suspect. It needs to make sense narratively in that flow.
James, you have anything to add to that one?
There is nothing that can save adventures in James's mind because adventures are print media.
Oh boy, you're going to get me in trouble with this.
It's canon. It's for real.
Your words.
I definitely haven't made it up.
And I have nothing indicating to the otherwise to back me up.
All right, this is a quick question that we got on our Spotify because I've turned comments on there now. So thank you for leaving questions there. We'll do one more. Or if they want to ask a question another way, if they're watching this on YouTube or iTunes or somewhere else, James, what's our email address?
It's podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
Yes, still remembers. But this one left on Spotify where you can also leave comments. Jas is asking, as someone whose character is caught in the middle of their warlock patron and in-game girlfriend, how does a party fight a god in a D&D campaign? And I see where they were going with this. Tips for planning, statting, and running god fights.
It's a god or your significant other. I'll just go fight a god because I don't want to deal with my significant other. Is that what I'm hearing here?
I mean, in Baldur's Gate, they can both be the same person, apparently, as it turns out. But yes, they are separate individuals that you are caught between.
So you're going to fight a divine being rather than contradict your significant. I'm just trying to get
Sean,
the context.
No.
Hell has no fury.
Fight a divine being so that you can be with your significant other, I think, is the thing they're going for.
Okay. I see. Stat blocks. Stat blocks are there for a reason. Are there stat blocks for gods in the game right now?
There are like demon lords.
Demon lords, not gods.
Does that count? Tiamat?
I don't know.
Tiamat count? Tiamat?
But
or is it like an
Fizban's made an aspect of Tiamat, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think Theros actually statted up the gods, no.
In other editions, there were, and like, who's the drow goddess? Louth. Louth had 88 hit points, just to throw that out there. Yeah, exactly. So here's the thing with gods or any powerful deity level foes. They've been around a while. They've seen a few things. They've had to deal with rabble like you before, and they've survived. So if you are going to take on a deity level being, you better pack a lunch. In fact, you better pack about 7,000 lunches, because it shouldn't be, oh, by the way, we're going to now go to Odin's realm and throw down with the old dude. It should be like the focus of the entire campaign, and every ounce of your strength should be used, and you should make so many sacrifices along the way to be able to do that. That's just like the general gist of gods in D&D over the years. If you look at mythology, say, you might get some. If only we had someone on the show who was versed in mythology, maybe that person could tell us more.
Give me a vague.
Vague.
Give me an evocative.
Evocative.
Yeah, see, that's the tricky thing, I think, because as J. Pizza Beat says in chat, my philosophy on D&D gods is that if you can kill them, they're not a god. And that is a pretty solid stance, right? So if we look at Greek mythology as an example, There are things that exist. There are artifacts that can harm gods. So we have, for example, the adamantine sickle, which was used by Cronus to castrate his father Uranus, but Uranus did not die. And we know that there are weapons that could harm Ares. Heracles managed to harm Ares by stabbing him in the thigh. So there are these weapons that exist that can harm gods. We don't really have the death of gods. So you see throughout Greek mythology that the previous, even defeated gods still exist out there, right? So the Titan, the primordial Titans, the Titan deities still exist even when the Olympians are ruling. There is kind of one example of the great god Pan is dead, but that's kind of an overarching metaphorical thing to do with civilization in the wilds. I'd love to talk about it someday, but it's not quite relevant here. So the idea of killing a god is very tricky. I think we get into a vague and evocative zone where we start having to think more like Pratchett, more like the Hogfather, right? How does one kill an idea? Because that's what these gods become. They become ideas. And whether you're killing them, I think if you're going to kill them, you have to really, it has to become almost heist level, like really planning it out in advance. And like Shawn said, the whole campaign becomes about that because you have to be really smart in how to kill an idea that is immortal. And that's just kind of its own thing. But you can defeat a god. I suspect it. But even then, it would be very, very difficult. It's like, how do you create a method of like banishing a god to another realm where it can never reach your realm, but you can still push them into there? Like, there's all these layers to it. But my recommendation would be, rather than making it a stat block, brawl, like a battle, I think there would have to be an element to it that's like ritual, not literally a ritual, although it could be, but there has to be an element to it that is beyond that is like, I am defeating them conceptually more than I am defeating them by overpowering them with physical might. That would be my advice in order to make it still feel like a god, right? Because you have to make them feel like a god for it to have that payoff.
And then what are the consequences?
What are the consequences?
If you're going to fight a god in your D&D game, you need to change the game. And I don't mean play a different game that isn't D&D, but you may have to expand the scope of what D&D is. And that's just because if you make a god something you can fight like a mortal, you lose what makes gods special. And if you don't want to make your campaign all about killing this god, right? If you have a character beat that is about doing this god killing thing, and you are not wanting to hog the spotlight all campaign for it, if you are not the protagonist of your campaign, then you need to find some way to alter the playing field for that one character. And I think you can kind of imagine this, if it's just for one narrative arc, you can imagine it as mortals can kill mortals, gods can kill gods, mortals can't kill gods. Gods can kill mortals, but mortals can't kill gods. So if you want to kill a god, you've got to find a way to become a god. And that involves, like you were talking about, ritual and immense personal sacrifice. You will have to give up a lot of what makes you, a mortal being, in order to go on this quest. I think there's a beautiful tragedy to this question that you've asked, actually, because you're having to choose between the wrath of a patron and losing one you love. I think no matter what, in a sort of mythic way, you are doomed to lose the one you love in this scenario.
There's also a great question there, this idea of there are so many stories about someone, about ascension, right? A mortal becoming a god. So I think Theros has a great fantasy example of that, but I think that it's modeled after the story of Dionysus, right? So Dionysus is this demigod, born the son of Zeus, and he travels off into the Far East, and then he comes back and brings the cult of Dionysus with him, the cult of wine and of madness. And then by the time he finishes, he conquers death, and then he ascends and he takes his place as a god. So there is this idea of someone who is mortal or sort of mortal becoming a god. Is there also the opposite of that? Is there a way to force a god to become a mortal? That which I think
Feed him
plays into the
goo, but make sure he drinks every drop.
Every drop, otherwise.
Otherwise,
Exactly.
he retains his godlike strength. Everybody knows this.
Of course, pain and panic. But there's the idea with Dionysus and in Theros as well is that if you develop enough of a following, enough people believe that you're a god, you can ascend and become a god. So then, is there a way in which your character could decrease belief in a certain god to the point, and that's the Hogfather again, I just realized, decrease belief in them to the point that they are no longer a god.
Right.
So just think in terms of that stuff, I think would really add that flavor to it.
The one addition that I want to add to this is something that I really love is the God of War games, particularly the Norse mythology kind of saga. I didn't play any of the Greek ones, but that's a very different. Like, I would love to set a high-level campaign where the idea is that the party are gods or demigods or something in some capacity. And so, gods aren't these overly conceptual things as much as they are maybe the caretakers of certain domains, the guardians of certain domains. I believe something that was lost in the earlier God of Wars, which I think James said earlier, something that wasn't in the new ones, which was lost a little bit from the old ones, was like the old games, I think, used to really show the consequences of killing a god. And Kratos even says, there are consequences to killing a god in the new games, in the 2018 game, but you don't really see a lot of that in the Norse saga as much. I would have been fascinated to see if Thor dies, is there no more thunder? Like, are there just no storms anymore? Things like that could be cool to experiment with, but the gods in those games are much less kind of conceptual and much more, individual beings that are imbued with immense power that shepherd domains, so to speak.
That's kind of like what happens in Avatar, in The Last Airbender, when the moon spirits are taken away. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I think if you construct your campaign, this is probably not super useful in the moment to Jas, but if you construct your campaign in a way that it is like a God Killer campaign. Isn't there a video game called God Killer or an RPG called God Killer? Then there's some fun to be had there. And but you're playing a high fantasy kind of mythic quest style game there, not the starting on a farmstead and going out on adventures style of D&D, I think. That being said, Dael, can you list all the places that people could possibly listen to this podcast if they are not already? In alphabetical order.
Can't they find this podcast anywhere that good pods are found?
That's a trick answer, but I'll take it. Yes. iTunes, Spotify, any podcast catcher, you can listen to us. Please feel free to leave reviews there or stars or whatever
and of course, you can find the vodcast on YouTube.
You can. Thank you. If you are watching us live or if you want to watch us live on Twitch, you can find us at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, or Australian Standard Time. Oh, sorry, that's on Monday. I always forget to say the day. That's on Monday. On Tuesday, 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time is when we stream because of time zones, doing timey-wimey stuff. But find us in those places. Email podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. Do the comments on YouTube and Spotify and the places. Go check out the Ethereal Expanse trailer. My name's Ben. Ethereal Expanse, sorry. The Enchanted Emporiums. It was the E sound. That's what caught me up. I'm going to do that again, Dante. You can edit it together. Go check out the Enchanting Emporiums trailer. My name's been Ben Byrne, here with Dael Kingsmill, James Hake, Shawn Merwin, and we will catch you again next week for another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. Ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da. Ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da, ba.
We scared James away.
Whoa.
He does not like ASMR. He's just like, no,
out of here.
None for me, thanks. James, you left your computer on.